When the woman in the wheelchair spoke, something about her voice made Sergeant Brooks pause. "Excuse me, could you pass the salt?" It was quiet, calm, somehow familiar, but he shook off the feeling and sneered. "Get it yourself, cripple. I'm not your servant." His friends laughed, recording the encounter. The woman's face flickered with something hurt. Recognition before she simply nodded and wheeled away. That voice haunted him all day, scratching at a memory he couldn't quite reach. A memory from his darkest moment, when a stranger's voice had pulled him back from the edge. For more powerful videos about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Staff Sergeant Natalie Rivera, 29 years old, wheeled herself through the Fort Benning main mess hall with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained for the past 3 years since her medical retirement. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her warm hazel eyes constantly scanned her surroundings with the automatic awareness of someone who'd spent years in combat zones. She wore civilian clothes today, a simple gray army t-shirt and jeans, her lean frame still carrying the athletic build of someone who refused to let her wheelchair define her capabilities. The custom wheelchair was military grade, designed for veterans who remained active despite their injuries. But it was what that wheelchair represented that mattered most. 3 years ago, during a convoy operation in Afghanistan, an IED had detonated beneath Natalie's Humvee. The blast had destroyed both her legs below the knee and killed 2 of her soldiers. She'd spent 18 months in recovery, endured countless surgeries, and ultimately accepted a medical retirement she'd never wanted. But before that, before Afghanistan, before the IED, before the wheelchair, Natalie had been something else. She'd been an infantry squad leader, yes, but before that, she'd been a drill sergeant, and before that, during her first assignment at Fort Benning, she'd been a training NCO responsible for the well-being of new recruits going through basic combat training. That's where she'd first met Private Tyler Brooks, though he clearly didn't remember her now. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Natalie had come to the mess hall for a quiet lunch. She preferred eating alone these days, avoiding the complicated dynamics of active-duty soldiers who didn't quite know how to interact with wounded veterans. Some were overly sympathetic, treating her like fragile glass. Others were uncomfortable, not knowing what to say. And a few, like the group that had just entered the mess hall, were openly hostile. Sergeant Tyler Brooks, 26 years old, led his squad into the mess hall like he owned it. He'd been in the Army for 7 years now, had completed 2 deployments, and carried himself with the cocky confidence of someone who'd proven himself in combat. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing sharp, his voice loud enough to command attention. He was everything a young NCO should be on the surface, but something underneath was hollow, a brittleness that came from building confidence on a foundation that had never fully healed. Tyler and his friends grabbed their trays and surveyed the crowded mess hall for seats. That's when he noticed the woman in the wheelchair sitting alone by the window, a book open beside her tray. "Check it out," Tyler muttered to his companion, Specialist Marcus Chen. "They're letting anyone eat here now. Next thing you know, they'll be rolling in homeless people." Chen laughed uncomfortably. He didn't particularly like Tyler's mean streak, but he'd learned not to challenge it directly. Natalie had chosen her seat carefully, as she always did. It offered a view of the entrances, positioned her back against a solid wall, and provided easy access to the exit. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept you alive in hostile territory. She was reading a book about leadership when she realized she needed salt for her meal. The shaker was on the edge of the table, just out of comfortable reach. She could stretch for it, but it would be awkward and might knock something over. A young sergeant was walking past her table. Perfect timing. "Excuse me," Natalie said, her voice quiet and polite. "Could you pass the salt?" Tyler stopped, turned, and looked down at her. For just a moment, something flickered in his eyes, confusion, recognition trying to surface as he heard her voice. It was familiar in a way he couldn't place, comfortable in a way that didn't make sense. But the feeling made him uncomfortable, so he pushed it away and let arrogance fill the space instead. "Get it yourself, cripple," he sneered. "I'm not your servant." His friends, now gathered around, laughed. Chen pulled out his phone, recording what he thought would be funny content for their group chat. Natalie's face flickered with emotion hurt. Yes, but more than that, recognition and disappointment. She knew exactly who this young sergeant was, even if he didn't remember her. She could see the swagger, the overconfidence, the need to prove himself by putting others down, and underneath it all, she could still see the broken 18-year-old kid he'd once been. "It's okay," she said softly, reaching awkwardly for the salt shaker herself. "I understand." There was something in the way she said, "I understand," not angry, not defeated, just genuinely compassionate that made Tyler's stomach twist uncomfortably. But he pushed that feeling away too, and walked off with his friends, their laughter echoing through the mess hall. Natalie sat alone, salt forgotten, staring at the young man who just insulted her. The young man who had no idea that 7 years ago she'd saved his life. Tyler tried to focus on his lunch, tried to join in his friends' jokes about the disabled freeloader. But that voice kept echoing in his head. Quiet, calm, familiar. "Dude, you good?" Chen asked, noticing Tyler's distraction. "Yeah, fine," Tyler replied automatically, "just thinking about training this afternoon." But that wasn't true. He was thinking about that voice, about where he'd heard it before. The rest of the day passed normally for Tyler. He led his squad through afternoon training, reviewed equipment maintenance, handled administrative tasks. But underneath it all, that voice kept scratching at his memory like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. That night, lying in his barracks room, Tyler found himself unable to sleep. That voice, that phrase, "I understand." Who had said that to him before? When? And why did it matter so much? He closed his eyes, trying to force sleep, but instead, fragments of memory began to surface. Uncomfortable memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Fort Benning, 2018. Basic combat training, the worst period of his entire life. Tyler had enlisted at 18, fresh out of high school, full of patriotic dreams and naive confidence. But basic training had shattered him. The physical demands, the mental pressure, the constant stress, the drill sergeants screaming in his face, it had all become too much. And then there were the letters, or rather, the lack of letters. His girlfriend had dumped him via text during week 3. His father, who'd never supported his decision to enlist, had written once to say, "I told you so," and never written again. His mother had stopped responding to his letters, too consumed by her own problems to support her son. Tyler had never felt so alone, so worthless, so certain that he'd made a catastrophic mistake with his life. It had all come to a head on a Sunday morning, during a rare moment of privacy in the barracks bathroom. Tyler had taken his M9 training pistol unloaded, but he hadn't planned to use it anyway, just wanted the weight of it, the symbolism, and sat on the cold tile floor, contemplating how easy it would be to just stop. He'd been crying, which he hated, which made him feel even weaker. He'd been holding that empty pistol and seriously considering whether anyone would even notice or care if he just gave up entirely. That's when she'd walked in. He'd barely looked up, too consumed by his own misery, just registered that someone had entered. A voice, a presence. "Hey," the voice had said. Quiet, calm, not judging. "You okay? Go away," Tyler had muttered, but the person hadn't gone away, had sat down on the floor next to him, not too close, respecting his space. "I understand," the voice had said. That phrase, that exact phrase, "You don't understand anything," Tyler had replied bitterly. "Try me," the voice had said. And somehow, impossibly, Tyler had started talking, had poured out his fears, his loneliness, his certainty that he wasn't good enough, that he'd never be good enough, that everyone who'd ever doubted him had been right. The person had listened to everything, hadn't minimized his feelings, hadn't given him platitudes, hadn't told him to man up or get over it. Instead, she'd shared her own story about how she'd almost quit during her own basic training, about how she'd felt exactly the same way he did, about how she'd discovered that strength wasn't about being fearless, it was about being afraid and choosing to continue anyway. "You know what I think?" she'd said after he'd exhausted his tears and his words. "I think you're stronger than you know. I think you're going through the hardest thing you've ever faced, and you're still here. That's not weakness, that's courage." "I don't feel courageous," Tyler had admitted. "Courage doesn't feel like courage when you're living it," she'd replied. "It just feels like surviving one more day. But that's enough. One more day. Can you do one more day?" Tyler had nodded, not because he believed it, but because this stranger seemed to believe in him, and maybe that was enough to borrow belief from. Good, she'd said. Tomorrow we'll worry about one more day after that. Deal. Deal, Tyler had whispered. She'd stood up, offered him her hand to help him stand. He'd taken it, finally looking up at her properly for the first time. He remembered her face now, in his barracks room 7 years later. Young, maybe early 20s, dark hair, kind eyes, sergeant rank on her collar, name tape that read Rivera. She'd walked him out of that bathroom, made sure he talked to the chaplain, checked on him every single day for the rest of basic training, had never told anyone what had happened, never treated him differently, never made him feel ashamed. She'd saved his life that day, and he'd completely forgotten her. Until today, until he'd heard that voice again, and it had all come flooding back. "Oh my God," Tyler whispered into the darkness of his room. "Oh my God, what did I do?" The woman in the wheelchair, Staff Sergeant Natalie Rivera, his hero, the person who'd pulled him back from the edge when he'd been ready to give up on everything. And he'd called her a cripple. He'd mocked her. He'd treated her with contempt. Tyler sat up in bed, his heart pounding, shame and horror washing over him in waves. He'd spent 7 years building himself up, proving himself, becoming the strong, confident NCO he'd always wanted to be. But he'd done it by forgetting where he'd started, by forgetting who'd helped him when he'd been at his lowest, by becoming exactly the kind of person who would have destroyed the broken 18-year-old he'd once been. Sleep was impossible after that. Tyler spent the entire night wrestling with his guilt, his shame, his desperate need to somehow make this right. The next morning, Tyler went to the mess hall early, before his usual time, hoping to find her. He needed to apologize, needed to explain, needed to somehow fix what he'd broken. But she wasn't there. He went back at lunch, still not there, trying to be subtle, trying not to explain why he was looking for a disabled female veteran who sometimes ate at the mess hall. Finally, one of the mess hall workers mentioned that she usually came in around 1400 hours during the quieter afternoon period. Tyler arranged his schedule, blew off a meeting, and stationed himself at the mess hall at 1330, determined to wait as long as it took. At 1410, Natalie wheeled through the entrance. Tyler stood immediately, his heart pounding, his carefully rehearsed apology suddenly evaporating from his mind. Natalie saw him, and for just a moment, her expression closed off. She'd been insulted enough times to recognize when someone was positioning themselves to harass her. She started to turn her wheelchair toward a different section of the mess hall. "Staff Sergeant Rivera," Tyler called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, I need to talk to you." Natalie paused, then slowly turned to face him. Her expression was guarded, waiting to see what fresh cruelty this young sergeant had planned. Tyler walked toward her, and as he got closer, she could see something in his face that hadn't been there yesterday. Recognition and devastation. "You remember," she said quietly. "It wasn't a question." "I remember," Tyler confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Staff Sergeant, I don't know how to. I can't." Words failed him. "How do you apologize for forgetting someone who saved your life? How do you apologize for becoming the kind of person who mocks heroes?" Natalie looked at him for a long moment, then gestured to an empty table in a quiet corner. "Sit with me, Sergeant Brooks." They moved to the table together, Tyler feeling like he was walking to his own execution. He deserved it. He deserved every bit of anger she could throw at him. Once they were seated, Natalie spoke first. "When did you remember?" "Last night," Tyler admitted. "Your voice, the way you said, 'I understand.' It all came back. Fort Benning, 2018, the bathroom, the pistol. You saved my life, and his voice broke. "I called you a cripple. I mocked you. I treated you like you were nothing. You treated me like I was less than human," Natalie said calmly. "Like my wheelchair erased everything else about me. Like my disability meant I didn't deserve basic respect." "I'm so sorry," Tyler said, and there were actual tears in his eyes now. "Staff Sergeant, I'm so sorry. I don't have an excuse. I forgot who you were. I forgot what you did for me. I forgot how to be the person you believed I could become." Natalie was quiet for a moment, studying him. "Tell me, Sergeant Brooks, what happened to that scared kid from 2018? "I grew up," Tyler replied. "I got stronger. I deployed twice. I proved everyone wrong who said I wouldn't make it. And in the process of proving everyone wrong, You became the kind of person who kicks down instead of lifting up. The question hit like a physical blow. Tyler couldn't respond, couldn't defend himself, because she was absolutely right. You want to know something? Natalie continued. I didn't recognize you yesterday. 7 years, different rank, you've changed physically. But your voice, when you called me that name, that reminded me of every drill sergeant who ever tried to break recruits instead of build them. Every NCO who used their rank to bully instead of lead. Every soldier who forgot what it felt like to be vulnerable. I became exactly what I hated. Tyler whispered. Not exactly, Natalie corrected, because those people never had someone pull them back from the edge. They never knew what it felt like to be saved. You did. You forgot. But you did know. She leaned forward slightly. So, here's my question, Sergeant Brooks. Now that you remember, what are you going to do about it? Tyler looked up at her. This woman in a wheelchair who'd lost her legs serving her country, who'd saved his life when she didn't have to, who had every right to hate him, but was instead giving him a chance at redemption. I don't know, he admitted honestly. I want to be better. I want to be the person you believed I could be, but I don't know how. I've spent so long building this version of myself, strong, confident, tough, and now I realize it was all hollow. It was all built on forgetting where I came from and who helped me get here. Natalie nodded slowly. You know what I learned from my injury, Sergeant Brooks? I learned that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help when you need it and giving help when others need it. That's the cycle. That's what makes us human. She gestured to her wheelchair. When this happened, when I lost my legs, I thought my life was over. I thought I was useless. I thought everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished, was gone forever. And you know what pulled me through? What? Tyler asked. Remembering soldiers like you, Natalie said. Remembering that I'd helped people, that I'd made a difference, that my life had meaning beyond my physical capabilities. Those memories kept me going when I wanted to give up. Tyler was crying openly now, not caring who saw. I'm so sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry I became someone who would treat you like that. I'm sorry I wasted the second chance you gave me. You didn't waste it, Natalie replied gently. You're still here. You're still serving. You deployed. You led soldiers. You survived. You just lost your way a bit. That's not the same as wasting your chance. How can you be so kind to me after what I said? Tyler asked. Natalie smiled sadly, because 7 years ago, a broken kid asked me the same question. He couldn't understand why I was being kind when he felt worthless, and I told him then what I'll tell you now. Everyone deserves compassion, especially when they're struggling. Even if the struggle is one they created themselves. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Finally, Tyler spoke again. Can I ask you something? What happened? How did you? He gestured awkwardly at her wheelchair, not wanting to be insensitive but desperately curious. IED in Afghanistan, Natalie replied simply. 3 years ago, I was leading my squad on a convoy operation. The blast destroyed both my legs below the knee, killed 2 of my soldiers. I'm so sorry, Tyler said inadequately. Me too, Natalie admitted. Those 2 soldiers haunt me more than the legs. Private James Mitchell and Specialist Sarah Chen. Good kids, should have made it home. Tyler recognized the guilt in her voice because he carried his own version of it. Every deployed soldier did, to some degree. What was it like, he asked, coming back, adjusting to everything being different? Natalie considered the question carefully. Honestly, it was like going through basic training all over again, except instead of learning how to be a soldier, I was learning how to be a person. Again, learning how to do basic tasks with prosthetics, learning how to navigate a world that wasn't built for wheelchairs, learning how to see myself as whole when everything felt broken. She paused. But you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't the physical therapy or the pain or even the loss of my career. It was the way people looked at me. Some people saw me as inspirational, which was uncomfortable. Some people saw me as tragic, which was insulting, but the worst were the people who saw me as less than, as someone who no longer mattered because I couldn't serve anymore. Like I did, Tyler said quietly. Like you did, Natalie confirmed. But at least you have the excuse of not recognizing me. Most people treat me that way even after I tell them my story. They see the wheelchair first, and the person never. Tyler sat with that for a moment, then asked, "What made you decide to keep going? After everything you lost, what kept you from just giving up?" Natalie looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the question beneath the question. He wasn't just asking about her. He was asking about himself, about how to rebuild after realizing you've become someone you're ashamed of. "I remembered something you said to me," she replied. "Do you remember our last conversation before you graduated basic training?" Tyler searched his memory and shook his head. "You came to thank me," Natalie said, "and you told me that you wanted to be the kind of NCO who helped people the way I'd helped you. You said you wanted to pay it forward." The memory came back now, fuzzy but there. Tyler had been so earnest, so grateful, so determined to make her proud. "I failed," he whispered. "I didn't become that person." "Not yet," Natalie corrected, "but you can still become that person. That's what I realized after my injury. It's not too late to become who you want to be. It's never too late." She leaned back in her wheelchair. "After I got hurt, I wanted to disappear. I didn't want to be a burden. Didn't want people's pity. Didn't want to face how much I'd lost. But then I started volunteering at the Warrior Transition Battalion, helping other wounded soldiers adjust. And you know what I found?" "What?" Tyler asked. "I found purpose again," Natalie said. "Not the same purpose I had before, but something just as important. I couldn't lead soldiers in combat anymore, but I could help soldiers recover from combat. I couldn't demonstrate physical training, but I could teach mental resilience. My life looked different, but it still mattered." Tyler absorbed this, seeing the parallel she was drawing. "You're saying I can still become the person I wanted to be, even after what I've done?" "I'm saying you already are that person, underneath all the armor you've built up," Natalie replied. "You just forgot for a while. But the fact that you remembered, the fact that you're sitting here genuinely sorry and wanting to change, that tells me the kid I helped 7 years ago is still in there." "How do I fix this?" Tyler asked. "How do I make this right?" "You start by changing how you treat people," Natalie said simply. "Not just me, but everyone, especially the ones who remind you of your own vulnerabilities. The ones who are struggling, who are different, who don't fit the standard image of what a soldier should be." She held his gaze. "Every time you see someone you're tempted to mock or dismiss or look down on, I want you to remember that bathroom in 2018. Remember how it felt to be the person people gave up on, and then make a different choice." Tyler nodded slowly. "I can do that. I will do that." "Good," Natalie said. "And there's one more thing." "Anything," Tyler said earnestly. "I want you to talk to someone," Natalie said. "A chaplain, a counselor, someone, because the fact that you forgot what I did for you, the fact that you became someone who bullies people, that suggests you never fully dealt with what you were going through back then. You survived, which is good, but surviving isn't the same as healing." Tyler wanted to deny it, wanted to insist he was fine, but he couldn't, because she was right. He'd spent 7 years proving he was strong enough to be a soldier, but he'd never dealt with the scared kid underneath who still believed he wasn't good enough. "Okay," he agreed. "I'll talk to someone. I promise." They sat together for a while longer, talking about smaller things. Natalie asked about his deployments, his soldiers, his career goals. Tyler asked about her volunteer work, her recovery, what she did with her time now. It was normal conversation between two soldiers, the kind that would have happened naturally if Tyler hadn't been an idiot the day before. As their conversation wound down, Tyler said, "Staff Sergeant, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but could I see you again? Not to apologize more, just I'd like to learn from you, the way I was supposed to 7 years ago." Natalie considered this. "I'm here most afternoons around this time. If you want to talk, I'll be here." "But Sergeant Brooks." "Yes, ma'am? I need you to understand something. I'm not forgiving you because I think what you did was okay. I'm forgiving you because I believe people can change, and because holding on to anger takes more energy than I have to spare. But if you're going to be better, you actually have to be better, not just to me, but to everyone." "I understand," Tyler said, "and I will be, I promise." As Natalie wheeled toward the exit, Tyler called out one more time, "Staff Sergeant Rivera, thank you for everything, then and now." Natalie paused, looked back at him and smiled. "You're welcome, Sergeant Brooks." And Tyler, "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words, "I'm proud of you," hit Tyler harder than any reprimand ever could, because he hadn't heard them from his father, hadn't heard them from his commanders, hadn't felt like he deserved them from anyone. But hearing them from the person who'd saved his life made him determined to finally become someone who actually earned them. Over the following weeks, Tyler made good on his promises. He met with Natalie regularly, learning from her not just about leadership, but about empathy, about seeing people as complex human beings rather than simple categories. He also started talking to a counselor, working through the issues he'd buried for 7 years. It was uncomfortable, painful even, facing the parts of himself he'd tried to forget, but it was necessary. More importantly, Tyler changed how he led his soldiers. He stopped using mockery and intimidation, started actually listening when his soldiers had problems, began treating mistakes as teaching opportunities rather than signs of weakness. His soldiers noticed the change. Some were confused, some were suspicious, but most responded positively to having an NCO who actually seemed to care about them as people. 3 months after their reunion, Tyler approached Natalie with a request. "Staff Sergeant, I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak to my soldiers about your experiences, about leadership, about mental health and getting help when you need it." Natalie agreed, and the following week, she wheeled into Tyler's company area to address his platoon. She didn't sugarcoat her story. She talked about her combat experiences, about losing her legs, about the difficulty of recovery. But she also talked about resilience, about the importance of asking for help, about how strength comes in many forms. And then she did something Tyler hadn't expected. She told them about a young private she'd once helped, who'd been struggling during basic training, who'd contemplated giving up on everything. "I'm not going to name him," she said, looking directly at Tyler, "because that's his story to tell if he wants to. But I will tell you that this soldier went on to serve with honor, to lead troops, to deploy successfully, because someone noticed he was struggling and helped him. That's what we do for each other in the military. We take care of our own." Tyler stood at the back of the formation, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding what it meant to be the kind of NCO who lifted people up instead of tearing them down. After the formation ended and the soldiers dispersed, Tyler approached Natalie privately. "Thank you for not naming me," he said. "Your story is yours to share or not share." Natalie replied, "I would never take that choice from you. I think I'm ready to share it," Tyler said. "I think it might help some of my soldiers to know that their sergeant isn't perfect, that he's struggled too." "That takes courage," Natalie said approvingly. "I learned it from you," Tyler replied simply. 6 months after their reunion, Tyler received orders for a new assignment. He'd been selected for the drill sergeant course. He'd be going back to Fort Benning, to the same training environment where he'd almost given up, but this time as an instructor. He was terrified and honored in equal measure. Before he left, he met Natalie one final time at their usual table in the mess hall. "I got my orders," he told her. "Drill sergeant school." Natalie's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's wonderful, Tyler. You'll be excellent." "I don't know about that," Tyler admitted. "I'm scared I'll mess up some kid the way I messed myself up for so long." "You won't," Natalie said with certainty, "because you know what it's like to struggle. You know how to reach someone when they're at their lowest. And most importantly, you remember." "I'll never forget again," Tyler promised. "What you did for me, what you taught me, I'm going to pay it forward every single day." As Tyler stood to leave, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal object. It was a challenge coin, custom-made, with the drill sergeant badge on one side and an inscription on the other. "Some heroes wear wheelchairs. I had this made," he said, handing it to Natalie. "I want you to have it, because you're the reason I'm going to be a drill sergeant instead of a statistic. You're the reason I'm still here." Natalie took the coin, her eyes shining with emotion. "You were always going to make it, Tyler. I just helped you see it." "No," Tyler corrected gently. "I was ready to give up. You didn't just help me see my potential. You saved my life. And then, 7 years later, you saved it again by forgiving me and teaching me how to be better." They hugged goodbye, two soldiers whose lives had intersected in moments of crisis and emerged stronger for it. As Tyler walked out of the mess hall for the last time before his transfer, he thought about the scared 18-year-old kid he'd been, sitting on that bathroom floor contemplating ending everything. That kid would never have believed he'd become a drill sergeant, would never have believed he'd lead soldiers in combat, would never have believed he'd have the honor of helping the next generation of soldiers the way Staff Sergeant Natalie Rivera had helped him. But belief is a strange thing. Sometimes you borrow it from others until you can grow your own, and sometimes, when you forget what you believed, someone reminds you with their voice, their compassion, their unwavering faith that people can change. Tyler Brooks had forgotten once. He'd become cruel, had mocked the very person who'd saved him, but he'd remembered. And in remembering, he'd finally become the person he was always meant to be. Not perfect, not without flaws, but someone who lifted others up instead of tearing them down. Someone who remembered what it felt like to struggle and used that memory to help others survive their own struggles. Someone who finally understood that real strength isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help when you need it and offering help when others need it. That's what Staff Sergeant Natalie Rivera had taught him, and that's what he would spend the rest of his career teaching others. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever forgotten someone who made a difference in your life? Have you ever realized you became someone you didn't want to be? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to remember who you wanted to become and still become that person, hit that subscribe button, because everyone deserves second chances and everyone deserves to be remembered for the good they've done.